It's my great pleasure to introduce Robert Ragsac, speaking tonight on memories of Pinoytown, San Jose. Robert is a retired aerospace systems engineer, having worked in the commercial and defense aerospace industries in various research, development, and project management positions. He was born and raised in the North 6th Street Chinatown area, which is now Japantown of San Jose, California. Robert is actively documenting, preserving, and representing the social and cultural history of the first wave Filipinos and Filipinas who immigrated in the 1920s and 1930s and settled in the Santa Clara Valley. He is a member of the board of directors of the Moffett Field Historical Society and the Filipino American National Historical Society and National Museum in Stockton, California. Okay, Robert, welcome, and please share with us all your great knowledge about Pinoytown.
Oh, sure.
And I'm going to start the slideshow.
All right, thank you, Linda. When I started doing all of these kinds of researches into Pinoytown, people started talking to me about being a historian. I'm not a historian. As you can see, I was an aerospace engineer, so anything involving the social enterprise, I'm not very good at. But I was involved in trying to look into certain incidences regarding Filipinos back in the day and trying to identify what they were, who and what were involved in. I got labeled as a history detective by a friend of mine, Kurt Lakuda, who's the co-author of San Jose Japantown Journey. He called himself a history detective, and as we got closer involved, yeah, I guess we are history detectives. So the Pinoytown that I'm talking about is that I'm going to talk about tonight is a condensed version of a Pinoytown walking tour. Now, if you're interested in that, you could search on the web through the internet, Pinoytown Walking Tours. Now, this month is Filipino American History Month, so we've been conducting every Sunday a Pinoytown tour. And so we're having one this Sunday, and then the following Sunday, the last one of the month. And this is, again, in commemoration of the Filipino American History Month in October. If we go to the first slide, next slide, Linda, you can see, I can give you a little orientation. For those of you who might be familiar with Japantown, I put down modern day references. You can see there in red, the Japantown Timeline Bench, Roy Station, and the Buddhist Church. So if you've been down to Japantown, those are the modern landmarks. I've used this so that you can see where the historic Heinlenville Chinatown was located. In red was the original Heinlenville Chinatown, and then as the years went on, the entire area became what was then called Chinatown. That includes what later became called Japantown. The entire slide shows what I estimated to be what is now Japantown. You can see in blue, that's the historic Heinlenville Chinatown area, 1891 through 1930s. And in black, that is the core Pinoytown mixed in with Chinatown. That's why it's labeled 6th Street Chinatown Pinoytown. As a point of interest, lower, if you see that little house icon in red, that's where I was born in 1931. And so, as I like to tell the people who attend our tours, having been born in a house there, this entire area was called Heinlenville Chinatown, and then subsequently Chinatown, and then Japantown. All of that is the area that I grew up in, and it's what I consider to be the core area of Pinoytown. You can get a good idea of that in the next slide, what it looks like then at the time. So if you were standing at one end of Pinoytown in that black area I gave you, this is what you would see. Now, this is circa about 1947 or so, and the addresses that I was able to pull out from the directory. And I identified as best I could those areas using I think I used the Church of God in Christ 651. That was very obvious. So I was able to use that as a reference. And with the directories, identify some other areas, locations. That's what 6th Street, Chinatown, Pinoytown looked like in the 1940s. Let's see, I identified a tree landmark there, as you can see, because if you look at, we go to the next slide, you can see what it looks like on the other side of Pinoytown. There's a tree landmark. And on the right side is probably one of the rarest photos we have of this side of Pinoytown. You can see there's a Filipino barbershop, Kanoto's. In those days, it was Yamato Bathhouse, located at 612 North 6, and identified Toto's Philippines Neighborhood Grocery Store, Bacosa's Universal Cafe, that's a Filipino cafe, and then in the distance, there's, I guess I should have mentioned, was the Surakawa Ragsac Ideal Laundry. I'll talk more about that. And for those of you who have been downtown in 6th Street, on the left side is what was called the Kenyinglo restaurant. That facade still exists as such. Unfortunately, the Sunline Bakery truck obliterated or got in the way of the Kenyinglo building, because it's unique. And if, as an idea of how the environment for the Filipinos at that time is shown in the next slide. This is, okay, there you are, okay. Now this is a famous photo by Sprague Talbot, and this was a hotel in Stockton. And this is one of many signs that was really anti-Filipino. In fact, anti-Filipino immigrants was a subset of anti-Asian hatred in those days. And unfortunately, of course, we're still experiencing that as Asian American hatred nowadays. But that's the way the Filipinos who migrated in the 1920s, my dad included, and my mom. Now, my dad migrated and my mom migrated to the mainland because my dad was a Sakata. In 1924, at the age of 17, he was looking for a job living in Santa Catalina, Ilocos in the Philippines. And he decided to sign up with the Hawaii Sugar Planters Association. And that made him a contract worker, which is called a Sakata. And so he ended up in Hawaii, worked on the Ola'a plantation of the Big Island. And some of his townmates were in Kauai. And they told him to come over to Kauai and work for Waimea sugar mill. There in Kauai, he met this very pretty Pinay from La Paz, Abra, Philippines. Married her. Her name was Mary Vidal. My dad was Sergio Ragsac. And so the couple married and came to the United States in 1927. And there in the next slide, you can see what we tried to do at one of our exhibits. It shows as best we can the origins. There you see on the lower left, second and third from the bottom was my Uncle Ben and my dad. And we identified them as being from Barangay Panyada, Santa Catalina, y Ilocosor. Now, we use this chart as a means to not only solidify my generation and our heritage, but also for the younger generation that, which we call the essentially the third wave. My generation called the second wave, or the label that's been used for us is called the bridge generation. I'll explain that. The children of the first wave Filipinos grew up, they were born in the late 20s and early 30s. And having grown up in a Filipino household there in the mainland, as we grew older, we lived in essentially two worlds. We went to the white schools and had white friends, but at home we had our Filipino friends there in Pinoytown. That's the enclave where a lot of the Filipino families were, and my generation, the second generation. So here we were in a hard, very strict family, Filipino family at home, and yet going to a white school. So we have these two, what I call influences on our growth. And so the conceptual thought that came up was that we are bridging two social environments. So we called ourselves a bridge generation. And that term, I have to give credit to a friend of mine, was coined by Pete Jamero. On the next slide, just a little bit about my family, so you can see a little clearly. Those of you I know are interested in this kind of thing. And this is the best we could search for our family's history, because in the Philippines during World War II, a lot of the records were destroyed. And most of the records were in the churches, and the churches were of course, overwhelmed and burned or destroyed during the fighting. But through the my dad and mom, my dad's history, we were able to at least find some of the information about the Ragsac oranges. For my mother, Mary, there was absolutely no record that we were able to talk. She refused to talk about her family. And then she said, and many times, that she ran away. That's at a young age. So she didn't have any recollection or did not want to talk about her family. And it was one of the saddest things about my mom is that she came right out and said she hated her family, and so she ran away. And that's where she ended up in Kauai and at the Waimea mill. And I met my dad. There's the two branches that you see there, Francisco Ragsac, that's the original name of the Ragsac family. And on the right is Euphemia Reg. And so my uncle Leo is the first one that's born. Second was my uncle Ben. And then my dad, Sergio, and then Eusebio Reg. The three brothers migrated, of course, ended up here in the mainland, and in particular in California and in Santa Clara Valley. The fourth son, Eusebio Reg, wanted to also go to the mainland. Unfortunately, and well, actually, the three older brothers says, you could stay in the Philippines, take care of their family, while we send you money to help. And with the ultimate idea at that time for the three brothers to come back. Well, of course, what happened was the invasion of the Philippines by the Japanese. Eusebio Reg at that time was in the Philippine Scouts, and he was captured at the, I guess, the surrender of Bataan, and he endured the death march in April 1942, imprisoned at Camp O'Donnell, and died there. So he, unfortunately, is one of the parts of our family that we have very, very few records of. And in fact, I asked one of the people who were who have information and records of the Philippine Scouts. We could not find any records of him, but the idea was that he was in one of the original Scouts before they were fully organized under what was called USAFI at that time, United States Armed Forces Far East. And, we were able to identify other parts of the Ragsac family, which became Ragsac, and that's what you see on the left side. And fortunately, when I did this family tree, we found out that even though my dad left Kauai in 1927, there were other, subsequently, there were other Cicadas in the Ragsac family who settled in Kauai. So my dad said that there were Ragsacs there in Kauai, but he could not find a link and relationship. And so when I did this family tree, I just had it with me when my girlfriend and I went to Kauai on a vacation, and just on a lark, I looked in the phone book and I saw Ragsac. So I called him up and I said, I think we're related. And the person I called with a Filipino accent, obviously, and I thought, well, we'll have to just discuss how we're related. So he invited us to dinner that night so we can talk about it. So we went to one of his nephew's house, which was another Ragsac family. And so while we were sitting around talking after dinner, they said that somehow we must be related. And I said, well, I have a family tree. Maybe we could find a link. And I said, my dad told me when he was a little boy, his father, his uncle, Alejandro Ragsac, left. My dad distinctly remembered that. So that's why I show him us on the family tree on that left side, you see. And lo and behold, as soon as I said that, the whole room and everything became quiet, because Alejandro Ragsac is the father of the two Ragsac boys, actually Uncle Primo and Uncle Dominador Ragsac. And so that was a firm link between the mainland Ragsac families and the Kauai Ragsac families. And to this day, we have a very close relationship with the Kauai Ragsacs. And only because I just happened to write a family tree and brought it with us, with me to to Kauai. That's pretty fortunate. Okay, and let's get into the Filipino environment. In the next slide, you can see a little bit more about what it was like in Pinoytown. Like any other group of people, Filipinos in particular, there are certain parts of the Pinoytown, of course, were great places to assemble, meet, and talk all about their families and their homeland, jobs, and working. So this pool hall was formed by Leo Escalante Sr. That's the photo there in 1931. And that pool hall, as you can see on the left, had existed for quite a long time. And the area, the idea here is that when we saw this picture, we said, that is a great one that shows how well dressed, first of all, that these farm workers were when they came into Pinoytown as part of their recreation and leisure. But as one of the unfortunate parts of being a bridge generation is that you did not address an older Filipino by their name, but you used the titles or of respectful address, and that is Manong or Manang. Manong meaning older brother, or you call them uncle. And for the women is either Manang, which means older sister, or you called her auntie. So when we look at these photos, we can see, well, yeah, I know who that is. That's Manong, but we don't know his name. And this is true of the women also. And when we did assemble these photos for this Pinoytown booklet, we had so many photos where my generation would bring the albums and they'd say, yeah, well, who is that? I said, well, that's Manong. Manong who? Well, I don't know, or uncle. They recognized the photos, the faces. And so in many of our photos, we can identify who the people are only if they have their children still alive that can identify. Like in this case, Leo Escalante Sr. was identified by his son, Leo Escalante Jr. This pool hall that I remember was exactly from this photograph in Pinoytown. On the right side was a snack bar. There was a ping pong table in the back, and they had pinball machines. And then on the left, out of sight, was a little alcove where was a little gambling nook. And so there was a lot of gambling going on, of course, at that time. I should mention, some unusual thing is that Connie Yu, who is a author of Heinlenville, Chinatown, San Jose, she said that the Chinese had three well-known businesses: one, restaurant; two, laundry; and three, gambling. So in the midst of Chinatown, guess which activity was the cement among the three races, the Chinese, Japanese, and Filipinos? And that was gambling. Okay, and one of the surviving landmarks is shown in the next slide, and that's the Filipino Community Center. This is the actual last physical connection to Pinoytown Pass. This is a picture of the old building in the 1940s. Now it's not, it has been modernized and widened, and it is still exists there at that same location. But this is the community center at the time in the 1940s. And you can see that was a Filipino barbershop in the front. As I remember it, that was a really dingy location. It was, if you walked in through the front door, and you can see the door, part of the door on the left. It was narrow, and it was dark, and there were many tables where there was a lot of gambling going on, and smoke, of course, cigarette and cigar smoke. In the back was a small kitchen, and then some rooms for the field workers who stayed in Chinatown, but not in the ranch. We were able to identify the known founders as far as we were able to identify them. Now, these are the founders in 1933 that formed a Filipino social circle, which, as it grew, became the Filipino community, and that group put together their funds to actually buy the property in which you see that building, and that was at 635 North 6th Street. There's a couple of other locations that are of interest, and that's shown in the next slide. There you can see on the left is Bill Dare's Chinese Kitchen Supplies. So in the bigger picture on the picture on the right side, you can see his store, but right next to it is the African-American church. I believe it was the Church of God in Christ. And so what's missing, and you have to use your imagination. See that blank spot? That had housed two wooden buildings, two-story wooden buildings. They were boarding houses for the Black families. Now, the reason that I know that there were Black families there is that in the 1940s, I was a paper boy, and two of the Black families subscribed to the paper, the San Jose Mercury Herald, I believe it was then. In those days, the delivery boys would collect the subscription fees. I know it's sort of weird right now, but we went out there and we got the money. And there were two Black families that subscribed, and I remember going upstairs into the boarding house to collect the funds, their subscription fees. So, and I mentioned that there was the laundry, and the next slide you can see what was the still existing building. Back it up, there we go. This is Ichimatsu Surakawa's Ideal Laundry Company. In 1929, he had that building built, and it was going to be in a central location for a major laundry operation. And it was called Ideal Laundry. Now, if you look closely, you could still see EA, and then a little bit of Y on the right side, and C, which is Ideal Laundry Co. That over the years, this building was a courthouse. It was a boarding house also for Japanese, Chinese, and Filipino immigrants. It housed a barbershop, restaurants, but the last occupants of business was Nishioka Brothers fish market. In the 1970s, just before they closed down, I remember taking my dad there to shop for fish and produce. But then shortly after that, it was abandoned. I do remember that the Nishioka Brothers was asked by the city to bring the building up to code, which then, of course, would have made it an ideal location. But in 1970, to redo that building cost $7 million. That's 1970s dollars. So you can imagine what happened. So it's sitting there abandoned. And this is a picture that was taken in 2013. It is now even looks worse than it is now. 1929, and of course, what happened in 1929? Tremendous depression. So Sorakawa had a tough time trying to make a go of it. He had 6 workers, 5 Chinese and 1 Filipino. So he decided to sell the business and he offered it to his workers. The 1 Filipino decided to buy it. And that's my Uncle Ben that's shown in the next slide. And you can see that the Art Deco tile in the front is, and the above his head, Ideal Laundry Company. This was taken about 1930. So my Uncle Ben was about 29 years old, I think it was, or so. And this building still stands, abandoned. We tried to find out who owned it, but we were, at least I was, some people who tried to identify who owns it didn't get any information, or maybe didn't pursue it far enough. But nevertheless, my uncle took over the business, but the building was just too big, and of course, in the midst of the Depression, he had to narrow it down. So he named it Ideal Cleaners and moved the business down to a smaller location on 6th Street, near the corner of Jackson Street. But I think about in the 50s that he moved the business to Watsonville. And although he passed away sometime shortly, his son and his wife tried to carry it on for a few more years. And actually, if we look back at how long that Surakawa's Ideal Laundry Company lasted, it was about 60 years. Now, my cousins have a record of my uncle talking about the memoirs, in his memoirs, about working in the laundry. That's why we know there are 5 Chinese workers and a Filipino worker there in the building. A better look at the Chinatown, Pinoytown, is shown in the next slide. Now, if you remember, I said there was Leo Escalante's pool hall. Well, a photographer stood on top of that pool hall, pointed his camera east, and took this picture. And this was a rare find because we have hardly any pictures of either side of 6th Street of Pinoytown. But you can see from left to right, there's a Philippine store called Tud's Philippine Neighborhood Grocery. That was the Yamato bathhouse that I mentioned earlier in one of the other photos. And there's Canuto's barbershop, that was also mentioned, and then Diet's grocery store on the right side. In the back, if you look sort of closely, you can see some parts of the Heinlenville Chinatown. Those brick buildings in the back and the furthest areas that you can see there are the canneries that were over on 7th Street and Taylor Street. Some of our friends love to hang around there in Chinatown like we all did, and that's shown in the next slide, where some of my friends, you can see, have been gathered there at one of the stores. This is Todd's Philippines neighborhood grocery store at 616. Now, in those days, the buildings were separated by an alley, as where my three friends are standing in front of, and behind them is a door. And those alleyways led back into the old Heinlenville Chinatown. There, if I remember, if you go to the back and through that alley, you can see behind the building stairs that go up to the second floor. That's how they access the second floor of the typical buildings at those time, were all wooden and had a stairways in the back. And in the back was by the stairways is the main street that bisected Heinlenville and was called the Cleveland Avenue. One of the more famous persons of Pinoytown, showing you in the next slide, is, oh, did I miss one? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, all right. That's what, good. This is another picture of Bacosa's Universal Cafe, one of the Filipino businesses. Left, and then next to it is Supnet's Variety Store. This is two of the major locations of the Filipino businesses on the east side of 6th Street. If you look a little closely, there's a World War II service flag on the window. And in fact, that location at 620 was recorded, that was able to find that it was the location of the very first Filipino-owned business. Was called Cafe Luzon by Nicodema Cadabona in 1931. But it only lasted a few months, unfortunately. So we have very little information on that. But it does show in the directory, 1931, Cafe Luzon, the very first Filipino business on China in Pinoytown. So in the next slide, we could show one of the more well-known personalities of that period. This is Miss Visita Todtod. She was Miss Philippines, representing the Philippine participation in the 1939 Golden Gate Exposition on Treasure Island. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember Treasure Island. I remember it very distinctly. And if you remember, if my collection is correct, it was in 1939 and 1940. It actually had an interlude between 1930 and 1940. But it was on Treasure Island, and Pasing was the representative of the Filipino participation in that Golden Gate International Exposition. Now, in addition, later in the 40s, she was involved with Hollywood. As you can see, this is one of her starlet photos. Now, if you want to, if you can remember this, that the movie, They Were Expendable, with Robert Montgomery and John Wayne. In that movie, 1943, I think it was a 44 movie, there's the opening scene where the Navy officers are at a club and they get the word that Pearl Harbor had just been bombed. And just before that incident, there is a singer on stage singing, and that's Pasing. And then when they get the announcement that the Pearl Harbor has been bombed, you can see that Pasing is wiping the tears from her eyes because of this awesome event. One of the major characteristics of the Filipinos at the time, this, of course, I should say that because Pasing was so popular and there were many, many Ilocano boys who were all single, they all tried to date her, of course, and so did my Uncle Ben. And these Filipinos at that time were shown how well dressed they are in the next slide. This is a typical photo of the Filipinos. And of course, here in this case, we were able to identify the three of the four. On the left is Dalmacio Kabibi. He ultimately became my stepfather. Mariano Catolico. And, I recognize who this man is, but I don't know his name. And relatives were able to identify Abraham Sakib. One thing unusual about Mariano Catolico, you see that many of the Filipinos were field workers. They were all field workers, in fact. But Mariano decided that he wanted to go to university. He applied for and was accepted at the University of California, Berkeley. And he wanted to become a history teacher. So he majored in history. He got his degree in 1933, with a bachelor's degree. He went on to graduate school and got a master's degree in 1934 in history, master's degree in history. But regardless of your academic standing, if you're Filipino, 1930s, you're not going to get a job to teach history in a white school. So what had happened is that Mariano Catolico, bachelor's and master's degree in hand, became a field worker, and I think ultimately ended up working for the city of Palo Alto along with my stepfather, Dan. That's one of those typical cases, of course, in the 1930s. This is part of the anti-Filipino environment that I mentioned at the time. One of the major things about Pinoytown is that there were several what we call organizations. And the next slide shows you one of the most active Filipino organizations. This is a fraternal organization, Caballeros de Dimasalang, or Knights of the Dimasalang. This is not a Masonic lodge. This is a fraternal organization. Now, in this case, as you can see, we were able to identify through the years when we kept showing this picture to a lot of my generation, we're able to identify these individuals. Of course, I identified my Uncle Ben Ragsac right there in the middle. So one of the prominent members and community leaders on the left is Max Peralta. He was one of the founders of the Filipino Community Center, and he is the Grand Master of the Caballeros de Dimasalang. And my Uncle Ben had a partner in the laundry business, and that was Benito Bunkay, standing right next to him. On the top, you can see that there's if we can find him. There he is. Dalmacio, remember the picture? Dalmacio, Danny Kabibi, and next to him is Mariano Catolico. He was the founder of the community center, and so was on the right side, Baldomero et Leon Quaresma. This is one of those pictures where they assembled for this very formal photo, and we estimated that it was taken in about the late 1940s. Now, this was one of the Dimasalang lodges, and this one was named Malvar Lodge number 7, and it was named after General Malvar, who fought against the Spanish and Americans in the 1800s, 1899 Spanish-American War, and then the Filipino-American War. Then another, what we call the townmate organization is shown in the next slide. You can see that this is the one of the hometown, what they call hometown origins families, and this one is Lapog sons. Lapog, of course, is one of the towns or villages in the Philippines. We were able to identify these individuals here only because of their children. We don't know who the others are. My sisters and some of my friends were able to say, yeah, I know who he is, but I don't know his name. Now, it's sort of ironic that there is a current club called the Lapaganians Club of Santa Clara Valley. I don't know how active it was, but my neighbor says that there is that club. But they have no idea who the people are of the Lapog picture that is shown here. So this is a sort of one of those disconnects that's sort of evident. This is a very, very popular organization, Lapog Sons. But of course, they've all passed away, and subsequent townmate or hometown club, organizations would find no relationship. So there's this generational gap, even between hometown organizations. Another hometown organization is shown in the next slide. And that's the Sons of Kabugao Installation of Officers. Again, this is one of those cases where we could identify many of them, but not all. Of course, we were able to identify the equivalents. There you can see that there is a Jaga equivalent there on the lower left, because they live next door to my mom. Yeah, there we've identified some of our peers there, as you can see, as the children. Right in the middle in a white shirt is really equivalent. He ultimately became my brother-in-law, married my youngest sister. There were other individuals who we are able to identify their names, and you can see there's Lino and Ronnie. And by the way, Ronnie was a great dancer, but we don't know his full name. This is another organization, the Kabugao. That's another town in the Philippines, and these what they call a townmate organization. Now, this club and several others of that time have disappeared as the initial founding members grew older. The children, my generation, the British generation, did not participate in them. My two uncles were part of the Caballeros de Dimasalang. They urged us kids to join, but we refused. I refused. I remember I would tell my Uncle Ben that I didn't want to join because the connection with that kind of a club to the generation that's born and raised again as a bridge generation, the connection is pretty tenuous. So my generation refused to become members of the Dimasalang, or for that matter, Grand Oriente Filipino, Legionarios del Trabajo, or even the townmate organizations. Now, I do remember some of the older of my generation did join the Dimasalang, but that was fairly rare. The Filipinos at that time, remember, this was during the war, and the next slide you can see that there's they did serve in World War II. Now, very early in World War II, in 1942, a lot of the Filipinos, of course, wanted to join to help liberate the Philippines because it's now been taken over by the Japanese. But at that time, the Filipinos and Filipino Americans, for that matter, born here in the United States, could not join the military. It was only through the agitation of a lot of the Filipino organizations to the U.S. government, and finally, I think it was Roosevelt wrote an enabling legislation to allow the Filipinos and the Filipino Americans to join the armed forces. However, when you think about it and look back into history, right after the Philippine-American War ended, and around, I believe around 1906, Congress allowed the Navy to have Filipinos from the Philippines join the U.S. Navy, but only working as stewards, mess boys, houseboys. So they were not what would be called the military ratings of the United States Navy at that time. And That's why you would see that many of the Filipinos that I remember who were older, they could trace their lineage, or they were veterans of the U.S. Navy early before World War II. And of course, many of the Filipinos, when they were allowed to serve in the military, joined the Navy. In this case, however, for the soldiers that wanted to serve as soldiers in the United States Army, the United States Army formed a segregated unit called the 1st and 2nd Filipino Infantry Regiments. I include the pictures here that shows one of my friends. On the right side is Sally Regala and her husband, Del Regala. And this is pretty poignant picture, I think, because he just came back. He's alive. He survived. And the reason that it was unusual is because he served his entire period of service back inside the Philippines during this occupation. And his role was to get intelligence, not to fight, but to get intelligence of the Japanese, their strength, locations, units, the logistics, and all their armaments, shipping. And he did that as essentially a spy. On the left side, we were able to find what I think is a really unusual picture, because there you can see Del and Sally going to a chapel in Fort Ord, California, to get married. And their escort was a rifle squad. And her maid of honor was Pasita Tudut, who I mentioned earlier. And then finally, there were many activities that the Filipinos got involved in, and that's shown in the next slide. And that was got the next slide? All right, there you go. So, okay, this is one of the many related Philippine events. Now, the Philippines was granted their independence on the 4th of July, 1946. Now, this is because of the Tidings of McDuffie Act, 1934, that was going to grant the Philippines independence in 10 years, supposedly 1944. But of course, the war was on. When after the war, on the 4th of July, 1946, the Philippines gained their independence. But now it is celebrated on the 12th of June, when the Philippine government, before the start of the Philippine-American War, the Philippines declared their independence on that day, on the 12th of June, I think it was 1900. And here you can see my mom on the right side, Mrs. Ragsac. There's Mrs. Raros, Mrs. Tremelius, Mrs. Villaros, and of course there's Pasita Tudtud, as you can see there. Their daughter, the Villaros, Mrs. Villaros, is Henrietta. She's sitting on the float. And this is the Filipino community of San Jose's float, celebrating the Philippines Independence Day. Now, the Pinays there, the Filipinas, are wearing the traditional Filipina dress, which is called a terno. They're characterized, of course, with the high sleeves, and in this photo, they all dressed in their formal ternos for that parade. Now, if you look at when I first put this picture up, and we all went through to it, we all said, "Oh yeah, that's Mrs. Villaros, and that's Mrs. Tremelius and Mrs. Raros," and of course we knew Pasing, and of course my mom. And it was one of those unusual things, is that we never knew the first names of those Pinays until their funeral. When we had their funeral announcements, then we knew their first names. They were all Mrs. to us. Okay, now let's go to the next slide, and I can show that one of the things that was very interesting, and I think I'm very proud of, is that two artists, Heinlen Bones and Jordan Gabriel, came up with the thought that they would like to paint a mural commemorating the Pinoytown and the Filipinos that era. And so they came to me and said they were going to do this free just on their own talent. And they wanted to paint a mural and commemorating in memory of the Filipinos of Pinoytown. And so we went through the pictures and I said, well, the only thing I really would like to say is that whatever the mural is, it has to show Filipinos, Philippine businesses as well as the people. And so on the bottom there, you can see the black and white photos that were selected. Those are in the presentation I just gave you. And then in the top is the actual mural. And the mural is on the Kagura building at 6th and Jackson. So if you ever go to Japantown, go to 6th and Jackson, and you'll see the Pinoytown and Filipino community murals there. And it was done by them strictly on their own. And so, but when they said they were going to do this, I said, I will support you. And so I supported them by buying caution tape, getting a ladder, and giving them hamburgers and hot dogs, hamburgers and coffee. It's a French fries, because the painting was done during the winter months when it was cold and rainy. But this photo, the Pinoytown mural, has appeared in several publications. And so it's one of those things that I'm glad that they did that, because it now became one of those things that people who are walked by will look at it and say, well, there must have been a Pinoytown or Filipinos here in this location where that mural is located. Okay, one of the things I thought that the group might be interested in, since you're all into genealogy, is as shown in the next slide. There you can see where the original, the first slide I showed you, that I included the fact that my uncle Leo married a white woman who was Italian. My uncle Ben married a woman who was Guamanian, or I guess they actually say Chamorro. My dad was the only one that was able to marry a Filipina from the Philippines, which is Ilocano. That's my mom, Mary. And of course, we had children. I use myself as an example of what we call the mestizo phenomenon. And that's in the next slide. Mestizo meaning that's part Filipino and something else. So there's my dad and my mom. My sister Helen married a Mexican, Lee Sanchez, Mexican American. Myself, I was fortunate. I married a Filipina, Mardina Lee Ambon. So let's go down on on the left side. That's my sister Helen, and married Lee Sanchez, and they had a son, Lee Jr., who married a white woman, Belinda. And then they had children, Lee and Renee. Now, I use M as mestiza levels. So now this is my estimate, mestiza level 3. Not a question mark, but that's the way I'm trying to keep track of it. So Renee married a real unique guy called Robert Cornish, or Rob Cornish. And they had 3 children, Pierce, Abigail, and Rowan. And I show a picture of Abigail. Okay, on the right side, there's my mom and my dad. There's me. I married a Pinay, Mardina Lee Ambon. We had a son, Robert, who married a very beautiful white woman called Cynthia Ann Reed. And they had 3 children, Jacob, Jordan, and Abigail. Now you look at the left side, at the bottom, there's Abigail. On the right side, there's Abigail. Now you look at them real closely, and those are old pictures. I have a more modern, up-to-date pictures. But the idea is that you look at them and you think they're white. But you look at the tree, and they have Ilocano blood or Ilocano DNA in them. Now if we go on to my sister Elaine, or Eleanor Elaine, on the right side bottom, and she married a Pinoy named Rudy Quiblin, as I mentioned earlier. He became my brother-in-law. My brother Ruben married a woman who was Filipino-Mexican, Filipino-American, and her mom was Mexican-American, and so on. So the thought was, as you go down in generations, you can see that the Filipino-ness, or at least the relationship to the original Filipinos, my dad and my uncles, gets diluted, I guess you'd call it. And what happened is that those following generations, M3 or what I call them, would not be aware of their Filipino heritage or their lineage unless you had a family tree like this. Now, this is just my way of making this. There's probably a better, much more analytic way of writing a family tree and showing a little bit of the genealogy. But when I did this, it was because I was on a panel that discussed that exact phenomenon, and that is the mestizo and the dilution of and relationship of their Filipino heritage. And of course, this could be true whether it's Norwegian or German or whatever, or Chinese. You could write something like this. And if you were in America, you could see that the succeeding generations would lose their relationship to their origins unless each of us makes a determined effort for them to remember and doing something maybe like a family tree. And I find that when I did this, that every time I see Abigail on the left, Abigail Cornish, and my granddaughter Abigail, and the other grandchildren of my siblings and my cousins, it does serve. This is page 25 of something like a 60-page series of charts of the Ragsac family tree, and this I found helps so that when we have our family reunion every year, I bring out the family tree, and of course I want to update it with new babies being born, or even divorces, or new brides, or new girlfriends and new children. So, and to the extent that I can, to keep that relationship and the fact that they have their origins in the Philippines, and that their origins is actually specifically an Ilocano side. I think that okay, yeah. The last slide I'll say is what I tried to do in our Pinoytown tours, is that 6th Street Chinatown and Pinoytown just essentially went away. Now, why is that? Well, fundamentally, it's because the succeeding generations, like myself, and those children whose parents owned a business, we wanted to go on to our own lives we're not going to be shopkeepers. I didn't want to become a farm laborer. I had to be in the 1940s because of the problem, the effects of the war ending, and then my dad worked in a defense plant, but now there's no need for workers. So what did he do? He went back to what he had started out with as being a laborer. And of course, we had to support the family. So my brother and I worked in the fields along with my dad. So, of course, my brother and I, Reuben, did not want to become laborers. So we wanted to go to college, and that's what we did. And my generation in the other cities did the same thing. They did not want to become shopkeepers. They wanted to run a laundry or run a business or run any kind of shop. They all went to college, or they went into the service, or they got married and found a job elsewhere. So there was no second generation that wanted to be involved in their parents' activities, businesses in Pinoytown. So that, as the original Filipinos, the first wave, got older, they moved out too and retired someplace else. And so Pinoytown that we knew which was then in the 1930s and 1940s, a very dynamic and active, multicultural location, Chinese, Japanese, and Filipinos, it's sort of disappeared. So there is no Chinese, I think, in what was then called Chinatown. And there are no except for the Filipino Community Center, that is the last. And that was the last one of the businesses surviving there in Pinoytown. And so what happened is that whatever was the Chinatown, Pinoytown at that time, was overwhelmed by Japantown. And so the Chinatown and Pinoytown that I knew and my generation knew does not exist anymore. And so that's what happened. And this is, I think, had happened in the Filipino towns in San Francisco. One of the things that I use in my talks is that a lot of the major Filipino towns in the other cities were identified as streets. In San Francisco, it's Kearny Street. In Stockton, it's El Dorado. In LA, it's Temple Street. And of course, here in San Jose, it was 6th Street. But all of those towns have disappeared, and they are now historic locations, remembered only by occasional buildings that still exist. So thank you very much for listening. Anyone have any questions after this long talk here? Okay.
Thanks. Let's see.
We do have some comments.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'd like to hear the comments.
Yeah. Ms. Darlene commented that, well, if I can pull it back up, hang on, it moved on me. What a great breakthrough that you had in Kauai while you were sharing your family tree at dinner, slide 8.
Oh, yes, right. No, that was, well, yes, that was a very memorable moment because everybody fell silent for a while, and then they just burst out. And then, of course, when you have something like that, the bond becomes even stronger. You know, we were Filipinos and we were Filipinos, right? But when you say Ragsac, now you say the bond has become really close. And the family ties are even more so. And I was fortunate that I'd done that.
We also had a comment, admire your ancestor Mariano, who had pursued his education in history, showed perseverance. Sure did.
Yes, it's one of those cases where he is rare. But one of the things that he told us when we interviewed him is that at UC Berkeley, he had no problem finding a seat in lecture hall because no white students would sit next to him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't think that's true now, but then, nevertheless, 1930s.
Did he ever get to teach?
Pardon?
Did he ever get to teach?
No.
No.
Wow, what a shame.
I think I saw a question there. Did Mariano ever tutor? No, well, I'll answer that right quickly. That question, wherever it came from. Mariano Católico could not find a job, period. Tutor or otherwise. He just, after he, according to him and his daughter, he could not find a job.
Okay.
Absolutely. So he went back to where most of us were, and that is farm labor.
Okay, we had a question. I'm thinking about your identified photos. Did alien records of the time period contain photos, or citizenship applications contain photos? I wonder if you could do some facial matching. What about state driver's licenses? When did photos end up on driver's licenses?
Yes, that's a good point, and I hadn't thought about that. We asked when we did this the interviews with my generation and with the photos. We in many cases, because Filipino history was not important to them, and to me at the time. You didn't keep any of the documents that were left by their parents, driver's license, citizen papers. Now, some of them kept military records, so that helped. So for those that were in the military, we always ask if they were in the military, do you have their discharge papers and their DD 214, which is their record of military service. Then we had some information, and then we can identify it. So you have military records. That did help. But in many cases, when we try to look for records in the Philippines, it's the same story about
destroyed. No, it's amazing you were able to identify as many people as you did.
Yeah.
This is ongoing, but unfortunately, my generation is dying off. So it's our resources are getting sort of limited.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, Robert.
Yes.
I know that you're doing walking tours every
Yes.
year. Who are your main participants? Is it Philippine descendants, or is it other ethnicities that attend your walking tours?
In general, it's a lot of the recent Filipino immigrants and their children. But we've had organizations that were not Filipino organizations that just wanted to know a little bit more about the Filipino history here in San Jose. And we've had individuals who, this is ironic, who lived in the condos right there in Chinatown, right there in Japantown, and had wondered what about the Filipino Community Center was about. And they heard, I guess through, I don't know how they heard about it. So some of them have taken the tour, and they're residents of the condos there. And we've also had college classes. We had them from San Jose State, we had them from De Anza, and a couple of other community colleges. The professors or the I guess you would call them the whoever was leading the ethnic studies or Asian American studies or Asian studies, they heard about the walking tours, and as part of their studies, they would have the class. Though at least those who can attend take the tour, and I'm very happy about that because when we reach out to the younger generation, I hope a lot of what we talk about in our walking tours stays with them. As I said, let me take the time to use an analogy, and I hope it's clear. You know, American history is like a beach. It is mostly white sand. Every once in a while, somebody brings a grain of sand that is black, yellow, red, brown, and one day, and it's growing. And through those kids that come out of the classes and from the universities or the colleges, maybe they're the ones who are going to bring a teaspoon and put it on that beach. Maybe some really great guy will come in for the cup. And this is true for the other races. That's my analogy. I hope everybody understands that. Okay.
Well, did we have any other questions? Oh, yep, another question just came in. Did the Filipino community and businesses on 6th Street, San Jose ever have opportunities to talk to the Italian community on 4th Street in Japantown?
The Italian community on 4th Street, there's a bigger Italian community on 13th Street.
Yeah.
On Bakesto Park. But yes, not community as such. Now, my friends, because I was born and raised on 4th Street, there was 2 Italian families on 4th Street. I can only remember one. That was the Borghese family. And then there was a black family called the Wilson family on 4th Street. Now, on 13th Street, there was I can't remember the names of my Italian friends then at the time, because on 13th Street, if some of the Italians will remember, the church was Holy Cross Church. And being a Roman Catholic at that time, growing up, our family went to Mass there at Holy Cross, and it was all Italian. In fact, there's a great anecdote if if you have time for this, and that is, my brother and I were newspaper boys during the summer, and we would deliver the papers early in the morning. And so on Sundays, because we knew we had to go to church, we thought we would preempt that having been dragged to the church for Mass. We would go to the 5:30 Mass at Holy Cross Church. In those days, the sermon was in Latin and the sermon was in Italian. And not only that, many times one of the elderly Italian guys, Italian men, who collected the collection, asked me to help him. And so here's me and this old Italian guy, and me, this 12, 13-year-old Filipino newspaper boy, carrying the collection basket in the church. That's my relationship to the Italian community.
Wow. That's great. So Mary Alice had an interesting comment. She said it was a very interesting presentation. My New York childhood saw only Irish marrying Irish, Italian marrying only Italians, and so on. I can appreciate what happens when cultures marry outside their own culture, diluting the previous strong bonds of identity.
Oh, yes. Right.
That's kind of your story.
Yeah, right. No, this is, I know the Filipino side, and of course there's the mix, regardless of where your origins are, you'll have that problem. And one of my friends says the children who married out, the term was married out, which means that you did not marry another Filipino. And I suspect it could be true of Mexico, American Indians, or Italians, Germans, whatever. And this is a phenomenon. For the Filipinos, it's called mestizo, mixed marriage.
Yeah. Wow. So Ms. Darlene said she loved your story. She also mentioned the DeMarco family, Michael DeMarco from the Italian community. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the name, but God, I wish I could remember the Italian names. Oh, Charmonti, the Charmonti family. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Catello, the Catello family.
So Jean is asking about how many Filipinos were in 1930.
Oh, that was a hard one to guess, but we kept on thinking about that, and that's we estimated. This is an estimate because of who we knew, and it couldn't be more than 200, or maybe there was 300. So, not families, people.
Just individuals.
Yeah, because there could be more because of the families. We didn't know all the families. If the families were working, the Filipinos were working in Gilroy or Morgan Hill or Mountain View or Palo Alto, we may know of them, but they may be one of the unknown photos, individuals as shown in the photos there, because not all of them lived in Pinoytown.
Wow.
But now I think the Philippine population in the United States is the third largest minority. Something like that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, any other comments or questions before we sign off? That was very informative. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. My favorite doctor in the whole world is a Filipino doctor. So. Dr. Kabidi. Yeah. And actually, I had many Filipino colleagues when I worked at Hewlett Packard. So.
Oh, Hewlett Packard? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right. No. on the assembly line or something like that?
No, I was in IT. So,
Oh, okay. That's
yeah, building back office systems for internal
Okay.
HPUs. Yeah. Okay.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Sally says great presentation. Betsy said good talk, good slides. Thanks. Yeah, I
Oh,
think it was
thank you.
very well received, Robert. Thank you.
Yes, thank
Oh.
you very much.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for
Very informative.
yeah, just thanks for the opportunity for me to tell the story. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate that.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll be
And-
back here next Thursday. I mean, next month. Sorry, go ahead.
And that'll be with Tara, correct?
With Tara Crawford for DNA Angels. Yeah, which should also be a very informative. So I hope you join us.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks, Robert.
again.
Thank
Have
you.
a good evening.